The Sega Genesis is one of my favorite video game consoles of all time. So many of its games were classics that I still happily play today. Despite my love and adoration for it, it still has a number of titles I just can't stand. I've given them multiple chances over the years to change my mind, and I still just can't find any appeal in them at all. Some are so repulsive to me, I genuinely feel anger whenever I see them on the screen. That brings us to the third installment of my least favorite Sega Genesis games. Here we are going to take a look at another assortment of trash that deserves none of your time or hard-earned money. They range from platformers, an arcade translation, and even a sports entry to keep things varied. If you are interested in the first two parts of this series, check out the description for some links. I hope you guys enjoy my least favorite Sega Genesis games, Part 3. When I began to explore the Mega Drive's library from other regions of the world, I was excited to find the PAL exclusive Yogi Bear cartoon capers. Many of these types of platformers had been at the very least decent experiences, and some, like Castle of Illusion, had been an outright blast. I wouldn't discover this one until well after the demise of the platform, but even then I was shocked at just how bad it was. Janky scrolling, bad hit detection, and some truly boring gameplay really hammer the fun factor here. It's a real shame too, because the graphics and animation are actually not bad at all. But that's the only positive here. Every stage is about collecting the same three things endlessly, with little variation other than the stage visuals. I know it's for kids and it is easy once you get the feel for things, but this fails on every level to hold your attention. It was published by GameTech in 1994 and developed by Blue Turtle, a company I honestly know nothing about. Funnily enough, even the Sega-loving Euromags at the time crushed it in their reviews. And if you know anything about Europe, when a Sega magazine had some bad things to say, you knew to keep as far away as possible. Playing it today reaffirms my dislike for this. Your kids may enjoy it, but Yogi Bear is otherwise a huge misfire. As an NES kid, I never cared much for Alex Kidd in Miracle World. It was okay, but not something I'd play seriously for any length of time. But good God, did I despise the 1989 Genesis release, Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. This was a launch title in North America, and man was I shocked by its pathetic visuals and laughable gameplay. Your attack feels so ineffective, your jump is so slow and floaty. But Sega also kept up the rock, paper, scissors nonsense, which basically leaves winning to chance instead of skill. I know Sega didn't want to stray too far from the original because it was so popular in Europe, but this should have been so much better. Reviews were all over the place for this. Some liked it, some thought it was okay, and some hated it. I'm in the camp of the latter full force. Sega knew what they had here, as it was one of the cheaper games released at the time, coming in under $50, while most Genesis launch games were $5 to $10 more. Alex Kidd lovers likely found enough here to enjoy, but for most everyone else, this 2 megabit letdown didn't show an ounce of what the platform was capable of. In early 1990, Sega released Zoom, a grid-based single-screen action title that was a port of an original Amiga game. The goal here is to take your little dude and outline all the squares on the game board. Yep, that's it. You can jump, and there are items you can get for points, invincibility, and freezing your enemies in place. It puts you in mind of kicks, but here you must circle every single square. While the gameplay itself isn't awful, it gets boring pretty fast, and after a few minutes, you have seen all this has to offer. But what really made me hate this was the main character saying the same damn thing over and over. Come on boy, come on boy, come on boy. I mean, he drones this out regularly and it gets really irritating after a while. This was another 2 megabit release that was under $50, Sega's early attempt at a budget line. If it weren't for the voice sounding off "come on boy" constantly, I probably would just tell you it's a simple game and leave it at that. Unfortunately, the developers decided to hammer your ears with a repeated phrase that really grates on your nerves. Gaming magazines tended to agree with me on this one, and the reviews were not kind. It has its fans, but I am certainly not one of them.
Come on, boy. Come on, boy. Come on, boy. Come on, boy.
I wanted to love 1991's Techno Cop so much. I mean, it seemingly had everything. Driving segments, exploration, blood and guts, all the things a growing boy needed for entertainment. But somehow the folks at Razorsoft and Punk Development managed to ruin it with some awful gameplay. It starts with the driving segments. You have to press up for gas and down for your brake, an interface that was usually reserved for computer games at the time, not consoles with plenty of buttons to do both on their controllers. Then the side-scrolling shooting segments start up. It's true the enemies blow up real good, but everything around that sucks to high heaven. Your jump is awkward, there is a horrible lag in your shots, and you're at the mercy of a damn timer. You also lose half the screen to a giant computer console on your arm that really serves no purpose that a much simpler heads-up display could have done. Things just never come together for this one, and it ends up being more frustrating than anything else. I should have heeded the warnings of the game magazines, because they all pretty much trashed it in their reviews. Growing up with a father that loved muscle cars and motorcycles, I got to indulge in his hobbies quite a bit. I became fond of mini bikes and four-wheelers, so when I saw Namco's Quad Challenge in 1991, I was all for it. What I was met with was a nasty permanent screen presentation that was slow, lacking detail, and just plain disappointing. Namco's typically solid track record took a huge blow with me over this. By late 1991, the Genesis was really hitting its stride and quality releases were landing left and right. I was blindsided by this turd though. I had read some pretty positive reviews. I had wanted it to be good so bad, but didn't stop to think that maybe I should wait for a rental. Instead, I pulled the trigger and ended up with something with next to no trade-in value and a group of friends that wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing saved it either. It wasn't fun in multiplayer, and the visuals all looked the same, except for a few new background tiles here and there. Namco didn't crap the bed often, but they sure did with this one. In 1992, I was privy to one of the worst games ever released on the Genesis, Renovation and Telnet Japan's Beast Wrestler. This isometric atrocity is a wrestling game in name only. It's rarely little more than a bear hug and choking simulator that controls terribly. I never feel like my on-screen counterpart is doing what I'm telling them, and getting knocked down results in being stunned for much longer than it should be. It seems the developers focused all their skill and time on making the monsters look good, and very little on making them control and play well. I wanna like it, heck I wanna love it to be honest, but there is little here to deserve your time. Lord knows I still didn't trust gaming reviews even then, but this one was universally panned and I should have listened. If you want to have some fun with some giant creatures, fire up King of the Monsters. It plays so much better. This one is gonna piss off some of you, but Toki going apespit is a game I can't stand. Released in 1992 and published by Sega themselves, this is inspired by the arcade game of the same name by Tad Corporation. It's a horizontal and vertically scrolling walk-in gun starring Toki, a man turned into an ape who is trying to save his woman from the evil Dr. Stark. You can get different power-ups like three-way shots, power blast, and of course things like invincibility and extra lives. There's a bunch more stages here than in the original arcade too, leading you to believe it's quite worth playing. I thought so too at first, but after a few stages the slow gameplay and one-hit deaths really start to weigh heavy on your patience. And it isn't just because it's difficult, it's the way your deaths unfold. Because you are so incredibly slow, I never feel like you can move fast enough to avoid all the enemies and environmental dangers. You can play it to death and learn where everything is going to pop out, but that means loads of time investment and dying. A lot. You can get a shoe power up that speeds things up a bit, but it still never feels as fast as it should be. And while the backgrounds are quite nifty, the main character is just goofy looking as hell. His animation is silly and the sprite is just unappealing in its design. I know many love it, but the slow movement combined with the one-hit deaths just turned me away forever. Reviews tended to favor it though, so I might be the odd man out on this one. You may have noticed that I'm mixing in magazine reviews in this episode. I wanted to do that to show you how sometimes their opinions were in line with yours and sometimes not. It was definitely the latter with 1992's Pro Quarterback from Trade West. A big fan of the NFL myself, I was really excited to play it after reading some fairly glowing reviews. In pictures it looked great, but my god was I blown away by this turd once I played it. This has got to be the worst running sports game on the platform. The control is absolutely destroyed thanks to the 3 frames per second visuals. No joke, just look how bad this thing runs. From there it has no official license for the teams or the league, so there is no appeal there at all. I know old sports games don't get much love in the retro community these days, but many of them still play great. This definitely ain't one of them, however. It makes Madden look like the best thing ever in comparison. Every so often I have to laugh at the game design that came out of the PAL territories in the 80s and 90s. It's often characterized by stuff falling on your head, and damn does Tom and Jerry Frantic Antics embody that style and then some. Aside from the gameplay being stiff and rather difficult, there is always something falling on you. Tom and Jerry do get some projectile weapons here and there to help out, but your enemies aren't the real danger here. I really like the visuals of this one, but the gameplay is just terrible. It's exhausting keeping up with all the stuff in the environment that can hurt you. Every jump, every movement of the screen, every step of the way reveals something coming out of nowhere, usually just off the screen, to cause you damage. This becomes a painful exercise of seeing how long you can tolerate bad game design. I didn't care for the Master System Tom and Jerry game either, but this makes that look like a masterpiece in comparison. In fact, it's another one most of the Euro Sega mags ripped apart in its release. It's not bad to look at, but its positives begin and end right there. Have you ever encountered a game that just makes no sense at all? PacMan 2: The New Adventures was one such game for me. Released in 1994 by Namco, I didn't know what to expect with this one. The media reviews I encountered had been fairly positive, and it looked good in pictures. And there it did not disappoint at all. Graphically, this is a really impressive title. Color, animation, detail, it all jumps off the screen as one of the more impressive games Namco developed back then. But the gameplay here is just bizarre. You don't directly control PacMan. Instead, you must use your slingshot to suggest actions to him. I applaud Namco for trying something new with an old franchise, but in practice, this is a ferociously irritating game to play. PacMan rarely listens to your input, and the gameplay often depends on you just randomly shooting things until you find what you need to move PacMan to the next area. Action sequences are even worse because they are basically escort missions keeping PacMan out of danger. This worthless bastard can't do anything on his own, and the smallest mistake leads to a death. I honestly don't know who this is for. Kids maybe? Newcomers who didn't know the previous games? For those of us that grew up with PacMan, it's painful to see him reduced to such a worthless prop that has to be babysat the entire way. It may look great, but it's such a chore to play I can't imagine how anyone could have enjoyed this. As someone that read a fair number of gaming magazines back in the day, I really wanted to stress how hit and miss reviews can be. You have to remember that you are basically getting someone else's opinions. No review ever comes without a measure of subjective bias, and sometimes this can have a huge effect on the outcome of the score. Even the videos you watch from me are just my opinion. They aren't right or wrong, but instead just a collection of thoughts and how I interpret things. You will never agree with someone else 100% of the time, no matter how similar your tastes may be. This has led me to the understanding that a game review should never be taken as a black and white proclamation of quality. Instead, you need to consider who is doing the review and how closely their tastes align with your own. As someone who didn't enjoy role-playing games until the latter half of the 90s, I do not hold many 16-bit games in the genre very high on my list of favorites, for instance. My opinions and experiences will sometimes be radically different from your own on a great many subjects for that very reason. Reading the viewpoints of the gaming media at the time taught me to pay closer attention to what they were actually saying instead of worrying about how close their overall impressions were to my own. A review is as much entertainment as it is information, and will never be a replacement for good old-fashioned experience. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.